Imagine standing on the battlefield of Gettysburg, where the fate of a nation hung in the balance, a campaign that doomed the South's greatest gamble. By the end of this video, you'll see the Battle of Gettysburg in a whole new light and understand why victory slipped through the Confederates' fingers. But first, what if I told you that a series of critical mistakes, missed signals, and strategic blunders sealed their defeat before the first shot was even fired? In this video, we're uncovering the 5 shocking reasons why the Confederates couldn't win, reasons so crucial they changed the course of the Civil War forever. But before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to support our growing community. The Disappearing Cavalry. J.E.B. Stuart's costly detour. On June 22, 1863, as the Confederate Army marched north into Pennsylvania, General Robert E. Lee gave orders to his cavalry leader, General J.E.B. Stuart. Historians still debate the exact wording, but most agree Lee instructed Stuart to leave some troops guarding mountain passes while the rest screened the flank of General Richard Ewell's corps. Instead, Stuart controversially pushed farther east than intended, aiming to seize supplies and disrupt Union operations. This decision forced him to ride much farther than planned, delaying his return to Lee's army until late on July 2, 1863, 2 days into the battle. Without Stuart's cavalry, Lee was effectively popostei, blind bafoué. Cavalry units acted as the Army's eyes and ears, scouting enemy movements and positions. Their absence left Lee struggling to make informed decisions at a critical moment. Confederate artillery officer, General Edward Porter Alexander's, later condemned Stuart's move as a massive strategic error, arguing that cavalry should have stayed close to the main army for mutual support. Had Stuart followed Lee's original plan, the battle might have unfolded very differently. Fractured artillery and broken coordination. From scattered cavalry to divided artillery commands, hidden cracks in Lee's army weakened their chances. The Confederates' artillery lacked centralized control, leading to disorganized fire and missed opportunities. Risky maneuvers and unnecessary gambles. Stuart's raid wasn't just a delay, it was an unnecessary risk. History shows such raids rarely delivered meaningful battlefield gains. Instead, they often left armies vulnerable. Lost signals and communication failures. Miscommunication plagued Confederate leadership. Critical messages were delayed or misinterpreted, leaving Lee in the dark at pivotal moments. Strategic overconfidence and doomed assaults. Lee's army was formidable, but overconfidence led to reckless decisions, like Pickett's charge, a disastrous frontal assault that shattered Confederate hopes. The verdict: why the South lost Gettysburg before it began. The battle wasn't just lost on the fields of Gettysburg, it was lost in poor planning, broken communication, and critical missteps. Had even one of these mistakes been avoided, history might remember Gettysburg very differently. The costly absence of J.E.B. Stuart at Gettysburg. Had General J.E.B. Stuart been present at the start of the Battle of Gettysburg, the outcome might have been different. His cavalry, though smaller than General Henry Heth's division, numbering around 3,000 men, played a crucial role in reconnaissance, something the Confederates sorely lacked in the battle's early stages. A fateful miscommunication. On June 30, 1863, a Confederate brigade under General Harry Heth advanced toward Gettysburg on a seemingly straightforward mission, to secure shoes for Lee's army. At the time, intelligence suggested that only militia occupied the town, so no major resistance was expected. However, as Heth's forces approached, they clashed with General John Buford's Federal Cavalry Division, already dug into strong defensive positions. Despite being outnumbered, Buford's disciplined troops held their ground, buying critical time for Union reinforcements to arrive. Heth chose to withdraw and return the next morning, July 1st, with his full division, while General Dorsey Pender's division remained in reserve. This decision proved costly. The domino effect of Stuart's absence. Stuart's cavalry was the eyes of Lee's army, providing vital intelligence on enemy movements. But due to his prolonged absence, whether from misinterpreted orders or his own risky maneuvers, Lee was left blind at a pivotal moment. Edward Porter Alexander, a Confederate artillery officer, later argued that Stuart's detachment was a proustis, grave strategic error. Without cavalry scouts, Lee had no clear picture of Union troop concentrations. By the time General George Meade's forces arrived, 15 to 20 miles south of Gettysburg, the Confederates were already at a disadvantage. A battle shaped by mistakes. When Heth and Pender's combined force of 12,000 men finally engaged, they faced a reinforced Union army of 23,000 soldiers, nearly double their strength. Alexander believed that had Stuart been present, Lee might have avoided an ill-advised frontal assault, positioned his forces more strategically, exploited weaknesses in Union lines. Instead, poor communication, delayed reinforcements, and the lack of real-time intelligence left the Confederates fighting at a severe disadvantage. The verdict: a preventable disaster. Historians largely agree with Alexander's assessment. Stuart's absence crippled Confederate decision-making. Had Lee retained his cavalry's reconnaissance capabilities, he might have approached Gettysburg differently, possibly altering the battle's outcome. The disastrous engagement of Heth and Pender. Had General J.E.B. Stuart's cavalry been present from the start, Lee might have avoided Fon. A reckless clash between two Confederate divisions, Heth and Pender, and two full Union corps. Edward Porter Alexander, a key Confederate artillery officer, later recounted how Heth's leading brigade suffered devastating losses in their initial encounter with Union forces, so severe that they were nearly wiped out, crippling Heth's division for the rest of the battle. Pender's division, too, endured heavy casualties. Alexander lamented that these losses stemmed from what should have been a minor mission, securing shoes, not a major battle. The absence of Stuart's reconnaissance meant Lee had no warning that Buford's Union cavalry and later Meade's infantry were already entrenched in strong positions. The fatal decision to press on. Alexander sharply criticized Heth's advance toward Gettysburg as reckless, comparing it to another questionable order issued that same day to General Richard Ewell regarding Cemetery Hill. Ewell was instructed to occupy the high ground but avoid provoking a full engagement. A cautious approach that, had it been applied to Heth's mission, might have spared the Confederates unnecessary losses. Instead, Heth's ill-fated push depleted two divisions before the real fighting even began, weakening Lee's army at a critical moment. Alexander saw this as a broader failure in Confederate planning, prioritizing trivial objectives like scavenging for supplies over concentrating forces for decisive battles. Cemetery Hill, a lost advantage. After the first day's fighting, the Union seized Cemetery Hill, a commanding position that gave Meade's army a formidable defensive edge. Alexander argued that while the Confederate position was still strong, it was nowhere near as advantageous as the Union's. He believed Lee should have adopted a defensive stance, consolidating at Seminary Ridge and forcing Meade to attack. Instead, Lee chose an aggressive assault on July 2nd, a decision Alexander viewed as unnecessary and costly. Leadership failures and the weight of public opinion. Alexander also questioned Ewell's inaction after the first day. Though Ewell had orders to avoid provoking a major fight, public and political pressure may have pushed Lee toward aggression. Alexander contended that Meade, not Lee, should have been the one forced to attack, given the Union's stronger position. The aftermath, a warning for future campaigns. The crippling losses in Heth's and Pender's divisions not only weakened Confederate combat strength, but also deprived Lee of vital units for later assaults, including Pickett's charge. Alexander saw Gettysburg as a cautionary tale, a battle lost not just on the field, but in poor intelligence, miscommunication, and the misuse of cavalry. Lee's costly offensive, the strategic blunders that lost Gettysburg. Edward Porter Alexander, reflecting on Gettysburg, argued that Lee's insistence on attacking rather than defending doomed the Confederacy's chances of victory. A missed opportunity for defense. After the first day's fighting, the Union secured Cemetery Hill, an elevated position that made their defenses nearly impregnable. Alexander believed that if Lee had adopted a defensive stance on July 2nd, holding Seminary Ridge and forcing Meade to attack, the battle might have unfolded differently. Instead, Lee squandered his army's strength in repeated assaults against fortified Union lines. Alexander estimated that this decision cost the Confederates 60% of their chance for victory. The fatal flaws in Lee's plan. No reconnaissance, no preparation. Alexander criticized the lack of proper scouting before the July 2nd assault. No systematic examination of Union defenses was conducted, leaving Confederate forces blindly attacking strongholds. The myth of supply shortages. Lee feared his army was too far from its supply base to sustain a prolonged defense. Alexander dismissed this concern, pointing out that Confederate forces later foraged successfully while stalled at the Potomac for over a week. The Union's overwhelming advantages. Meade's army, 94,000 troops versus Lee's 72,000, held superior numbers, artillery, and terrain. The Federals' fortified high ground increased their combat effectiveness by 50%, making frontal assaults nearly suicidal. What if Lee had stayed defensive? Alexander argued that a patient defensive strategy could have preserved Confederate strength, forced Meade to attack under less favorable conditions, potentially altered the battle's outcome. Instead, Lee's relentless offensives bled his army dry, culminating in the disaster of Pickett's charge. The final verdict. Alexander saw July 2nd as the turning point, not just of the battle, but of the entire war. Lee's overconfidence and disregard for reconnaissance handed Meade an insurmountable advantage. I think it must be frankly admitted. Alexander wrote that there was no real difficulty whatever in our taking the defensive the next day. Had Lee listened, Gettysburg and perhaps the Confederacy's fate might have been different. On the morning of July 3, 1863, as the Confederates prepared for their climactic assault at Gettysburg, General James Longstreet made a fateful decision. He placed Colonel Edward Porter Alexander in command of the Confederate artillery barrage for Pickett's charge, a move that would prove decisive in the attack's success or failure. His orders were clear: unleash a devastating bombardment, 2, cripple Union defenses, shatter Federal morale, pave the way for the infantry assault. Yet the operation was plagued by disorganization, a fragmented command structure. Alexander soon discovered that General William Pendleton, Lee's chief of artillery, had reassigned several guns without informing him. Of the 9 howitzers originally allocated to support the infantry charge, multiple were missing when the attack began. This lack of coordination, Alexander later wrote, fatally weakened our firepower. Culp's Hill, a lost defensive opportunity. Alexander also criticized Lee's failure to secure Culp's Hill on July 2nd. He believed the position was nearly impregnable due to its natural defenses, yet no follow-up orders were given after initial Confederate attacks failed. Union forces reinforced their lines overnight, making the hill unassailable by July 3rd. That night it was pie for Meade, Alexander remarked, highlighting how poor Confederate planning gave the Union an unfair advantage. Ewell's Corps, a wasted force. Another critical error was the misplacement of Ewell's corps. Northeast of Gettysburg, after being ordered to reposition closer to town, Ewell's troops became stuck in an ineffective location near Cemetery Hill. Alexander sharply condemned this decision, arguing Ewell's forces were rendered useless for the rest of the battle. Lee should have ordered a full withdrawal rather than leaving them stranded. "They might as well have been spectators," Alexander lamented. The consequences of disjointed leadership. Alexander's post-battle analysis revealed 3 fatal flaws. No unified artillery command. Each corps operated independently, leading to weak, uncoordinated fire. Poor reconnaissance. Confederate attacks were launched blindly against fortified positions. Wasted resources. Critical units like Ewell's corps were left idle due to bad positioning. Final assessment, a battle lost by mismanagement. Alexander concluded that Gettysburg was lost not by lack of courage, but by poor planning. Meade's defenses grew stronger each day, while Confederate leadership fumbled opportunities. Artillery failures doomed Pickett's charge before it began. Misplaced divisions like Ewell's squandered precious manpower. Had we coordinated properly, Alexander reflected, the charge might have succeeded, or at least not been so disastrous. Why the Confederates lost Gettysburg, Alexander's scathing postmortem. In his blunt assessment of Gettysburg, Colonel Edward Porter Alexander identified 5 fatal flaws in Confederate strategy, all stemming from poor coordination, wasted opportunities, and disastrous leadership decisions. The artillery debacle, a command failure. Disjointed firepower doomed Pickett's charge. No unified command. Each Confederate corps operated its artillery independently with no central coordination. Pendleton's incompetence. Lee's artillery chief. General William Pendleton reassigned guns without informing Alexander, leaving gaps in the bombardment. Wasted howitzers. Of 9 howitzers meant to support Pickett's infantry, several were missing during the charge, costing critical firepower. Alexander's verdict. Had we concentrated our guns under one command, we might have shattered Union defenses. Instead, we attacked with half strength. The missed enfilade, Ewell's artillery fiasco. A golden opportunity wasted. Fishhook formation, the Union's defensive line curved like a fishhook, exposing its flank to enfilading fire from Ewell's corps. Only 1 of 5 battalions fired. Despite this advantage, Ewell's artillery remained silent, failing to exploit a chance to rake Union lines with devastating crossfire. Alexander's fury. We had the position to slaughter them and did nothing. Shock-to-do? A.P. Hill's inexplicable inaction. 65 guns, 0 impact. Seminary Ridge artillery. Hill had 65 guns positioned ideally to support Pickett's charge. Never fired a shot. Despite Pickett's men advancing Tambar, directly in front of Hill's guns, Hill refused to reposition or reinforce them. Ammunition wasted. Earlier that morning, Hill's artillery futilely shelled Union lines, exhausting ammunition for no gain. Alexander's disgust. Hill's guns might have saved the charge. Instead, they sat idle while our men were slaughtered. The Culp's Hill blunder. A defensive stronghold ignored. July 2nd. Failure, Confederate attacks on Culp's Hill stalled, yet Lee never ordered a second assault. Union reinforced. Overnight. By July 3rd, the hill was impenetrable, yet Lee still funneled troops into Pickett's doomed charge instead of pivoting. Alexander's regret. That hill was ours for the taking. One more push and Meade's line would have cracked. Ewell's stranded corps, leadership paralysis. Chapters. Thousands of men left useless. Misplaced division. Ewell's corps was stuck near Cemetery Hill, unable to contribute. No orders to redeploy. Shanish. Lee Beam never pulled them back, leaving Tanti. An entire division sidelined during the battle's climax. Alexander's judgment. Ewell's men might as well have been on leave. What a criminal waste. A battle lost before it began? The Confederates didn't lose Gettysburg because of bad luck or Union superiority. They lost because of their own mistakes. From Stuart's absence to poor communication and reckless decisions, Lee's army was doomed by its own missteps. What do you think? Could Stuart's presence have changed the battle's outcome? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into Civil War history.